All right, you're live.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Esther Manhammer. I'm the chair of the governance committee, and I'd like to welcome you to the October 11th meeting. All council members and staff are participating virtually. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 3405. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. To call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 3405. Your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. At this point, callers will hear. For more options, please press star. Pressing *3 will allow callers to continue to listen live and join a speaker queue. You will then have 3 minutes to speak. I will now go through and introduce all the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Gwen Whistler.
Hello.
And this is Gwen's last governance meeting. And Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good afternoon.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Hello, everyone.
Deputy City Clerk Sarah Gross.
Hello.
Okay, we're going to begin with an approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from September?
So moved. This is Kim, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We'll now have a roll call vote to approve the motion and second. When I say your name, please say aye to approve the minutes. Councilwoman Roney?
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler?
Aye.
Myself, aye. The minutes have been approved. And next, we have one item on our agenda today, and that is the council committee structure. And I'm going to recognize Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood, who will talk about the proposed revisions to the scope and composition of the city council committees.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Governance Committee members. So today's conversation is really a continuation of the conversation we had at your September meeting. The key difference being that today we are going to ask that the committee take action to recommend approval of the revised structure. As I go through the presentation, I'll highlight some of the revisions that were made based on feedback we received from you in September. The other key note is the last presentation, we didn't provide details on what the scope of the different committees would entail. I'm not going to go into any great detail on that today, but I will provide a little bit of an overview for each of the council committees on what the scope of each of those committees would entail under this revised structure. Next slide, please, Jenna. So a couple of key takeaways. As a quick reminder, today we are talking solely about the City Council Committee. So the subset of City Council, which were established to review policy matters and inform and educate the council on city programs and community matters. These structure of the current council committees has been largely unrevised since the year 2006, and a recommendation from council today will help inform the ongoing work of staff to enhance our organizational alignment with the city council's vision and priorities. One of the pieces of feedback we received as a part of the conversation we had with you in September was having that more regular review process of the council structure after council reviews and updates their strategic priorities. So that's something that's actually been folded into the draft resolution that, pending today's approval, full city council would consider at their November meeting. So we are looking at, as a subset of the conversation at the annual council retreat, after the priorities are established, having council take a quick look at the committee structure on an annual basis, just to make sure that there's that natural alignment so that we don't find ourselves where the committee structure isn't at least somewhat aligned with the council's priorities on a regular basis. Next slide, please. So just a few quick reminders on how we got here. Of course, at your annual retreat in March, you established your strategic priorities. As part of the conversation that occurred at your March retreat, we received some direction to reassess the council committee structure. Following that direction, Sarah Gross helped lead a work session with the City Council in May that talked about the council committee structure as well as boards and commissions realignment. And then at last month's governance meeting on September 13th, we got some feedback from the governance committee on the revised structure, which we'll be reviewing today. Pending any additional feedback, the plan is to bring this forward to full City Council for a vote at the November 15th City Council meeting. Next slide, please. So quick reminders on what the proposed committee structure is. The key change being that the governance committee would be combined with the finance and HR committee. Feedback that we received at the September governance committee meeting was to add HR. We had originally proposed that new committee being policy and finance. And so we are now proposing that that would be the policy, finance, and HR committee. Also looking at restructuring the public safety committee to be environment and safety, with the key tie there being climate justice and emergency preparedness. And then with the freed up slot resulting from governance and finance and HR merging, we're proposing to have an equity and engagement committee just to make sure that we have a natural tie for some of the council strategic priorities around those two areas. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through this slide. This slide kind of just is another way to visualize what I just described around the key revisions to the proposed council committee structure that we're discussing today. Next slide, please. So I don't want to take any credit for the scope. I want to give credit to Sarah Gross, who did the heavy lifting over the course of the last month, working with the department directors, as well as reviewing our comprehensive plan, the council vision, as well as the council strategic priorities to establish the draft scopes that are included as an attachment to the resolution. And we're going to provide a high-level overview of today. I will note that this is really helpful to staff in clarifying what types of topics should be brought to which council committees. Of course, there are some topics that will be reviewed by multiple committees just for the different lenses and the different scopes of those committees. Land use incentive grants being an example of an item that's reviewed by Housing and Community Development, as well as reviewed currently by the Finance and HR Committee. But this is really helpful to staff just because there are sometimes questions around what is the most appropriate committee to bring an item to. And as we're working at having some more advanced planning for future work plans associated with council committees, this revised scope structure really helps staff just to better organize and plan for future committee items. Next slide, please. So just at a high level, I'll just note a few items on the proposed scope of the new Equity and Engagement Committee. This would be an opportunity for Brenda Mills and the Department of Equity and Inclusion to provide regular updates on reparations and the work of the Reparations Commission. Would also be an opportunity to provide updates. I know we've had several council requests around the status of neighborhood matching grants, so we think that would be another kind of natural tie to provide those regular updates. Also, since the focus of equity and inclusion includes addressing the opportunity gap, it might be an opportunity to transition the strategic partnership grants from the Housing and Community Development Committee to this new committee. And then also opportunities to talk about things like our engagement initiatives and some of the updates that Dowah Hitch has provided to the governance committee in the past on access to governance or access to government. Next slide, please. Environment and safety, again, this would be that retooled version of the Public Safety Committee. Topics that would be discussed, things like facility upgrades and retrofits, climate change adaptation and resilience, climate justice, of course, the typical topics that have been discussed in the past with public safety as well. Next slide, please. Planning and economic development would be largely unchanged. This, for all practical purposes, has kind of been a catch-all for staff. If they didn't know specifically where to take an item to, it would go to planning and economic development. So kudos to Sarah for working closely with the department directors just to provide a little more parameters around what does and does not necessarily need to go to the Planning and Economic Development Committee. So this would include land use and zoning related matters. I know Councilmember Roney, you discussed, would this be the appropriate place for regional planning matters? And the answer to that is yes, that is definitely a part of the scope of this committee. Economic development matters, as well as arts and culture, and then major infrastructure project updates. Of course, with infrastructure, we have a significant component that would be environmental related. So that might be another example where something might go to multiple committees to talk about the environmental component and then the infrastructure component. Yes, Councilmember Roney.
Do you want us to wait for questions at the end or when the slide comes up?
I'm great either way. Mayor, I don't know if you have a preference.
So I reviewed these and I had one lingering question is, where does food system security go? Because I know that in the last slide around, I think it was environment and safety, water systems comes up, but we have the Asheville-Buncombe Food Action Plan, and I wasn't sure if that work would fall under environment and safety or maybe planning and economic development.
I think that's a great example of one that might go to both, depending on what lens you're looking through. So there's an economic development component, of course, of making sure that you've got access to grocery stores and other healthy food options. And then, of course, there's the tie-in to the climate justice and neighborhood resilience. I'm sorry, I meant neighborhood resilience, not climate justice component that might be more appropriate for the environment and public safety. So again, that's kind of an example of something where, based on what it is specifically that we're wanting to get feedback from council on, it might be appropriate to go to both or one specifically over the other.
Thank you.
Next slide, please, Jenna. And so housing and community development, this one is largely unchanged with the exception that we are proposing to potentially remove strategic partnerships and have that now fall under equity and engagement. So the scope is really housing affordability, housing incentives, homelessness related matters, and then our HUD funding investments. Next slide, please. So this policy, finance, and human resources, this is the rescope committee that would be the combination of governance as well as the current finance and HR committee. So this includes things such as that would typically go to governance, like the council rules of procedure, purview on the structure of council committees, but also pertains to items such as the CIP and our budget process and the annual audit. So it really is a merging of those two current committees. And my understanding is both of those committees have typically met on an as-needed basis. And so this would give, I think, a robust enough work plan to have a more predictable schedule for those committees moving forward. Next slide, please. So boards and commissions, and I believe this is our longest standing council committee, predating 1997. I think Sarah has records dating back to 1997. No proposed changes with this committee. Of course, this is responsible for appointing representatives to boards and commissions. Next slide, please. So next steps, today we're asking for approval of the recommended revisions to the City Council committee structure, scopes and titles. Following your recommendation today, it will then be brought forward to the City Council at your November 15th meeting for consideration. And then these new council committees would go into effect in January 2023 following the election and the mayoral appointment of council members to each of the committees. And then another component, as I already mentioned, of the resolution is that there would be an annual review of the council committees either at or following the City Council retreat once those City Council strategic priorities are established for the upcoming fiscal year. And that concludes my presentation. So Jenna, you can take it down and we can answer questions.
Looks like Gwen has a question.
Yeah, Rachel, the last slide said it goes into effect in January. do we not have any committee meetings in November and December? I mean, in December?
So, and this could just be me misunderstanding the sequencing of when the mayor typically names new council members to the committees. My understanding is the new council members would be sworn in December, and typically in mid to late December, committee meetings get canceled due to the holidays. So we're just thinking that January would be that natural when we could guarantee we would have a meeting for each of the new council committees. Sarah, let me know if I missed anything on that.
Very accurate. It will largely depend on the appointment process with the council members and the new committees following the election.
Okay. I thought at the organization meeting in December, people were appointed right then, but I could have forgotten. So
I'm remembering that might be what happened. But maybe someone will check on the timing.
Well, especially with new council members, we'll need to see who goes where.
We'll certainly get that confirmed and cleared up prior to council consideration of this at the November meeting.
Maggie's here. Maggie dropped in.
I'm sorry. The city council on their organizational meeting on December 6th take no formal actions like that. All the other appointments will be made to the boards and commissions, and the council committees would be made on December 13.
Okay, I understand.
Thanks.
She's good.
So I'm prepared to make a motion to recommend this. However, I would like to see food security or food systems added explicitly to, it makes the most sense to me, to environment and safety, because of the Asheville-Buncombe Food Policy Action Plan being an important body of work that we do. And being part of neighborhood resilience, I understand that it might not be in a specific place, but I think it needs to be acknowledged.
Certainly, we can add that as a bullet point under the scope.
Thank you. With that, I make a motion to approve the changes to our subcommittee structure.
This is Gwen, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second, and let me double check my. Okay. All right, we're gonna do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
and myself, aye. Okay, so that'll move on to council, and Rachel, I think you said it was going to be at our not tonight, but our next meeting.
The November 15th meeting, correct?
Okay, so the last item is public comment, and Jenna, do we have anyone waiting in the queue for public comment?
There's no one in the queue.
Okay, with that, I think we will adjourn unless there's anything else. Oh, all right, see you folks tonight. Thanks.